I still remember the sound. It wasn't music, not static either, it was his voice. Soft. Familiar. Like he was right there in the room with me again. I froze, holding my coffee halfway to my lips. The radio on the counter, that old wooden one we bought back in 1983, crackled once, then twice. And then, I heard it clearly. Evelyn, check the basement. My heart stopped. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the tile. Coffee spilled everywhere, but I couldn't move. I just stared at the radio, like it was alive. Evelyn. That's me. I hadn't heard my name said that way, his way, in almost 7 years. Because my husband, Thomas, has been dead for 7 long years. When you lose someone you've spent your whole life with, the silence they leave behind becomes its own kind of ghost. It sits with you during dinner, follows you into bed, whispers through the hallways at night. But this wasn't silence. This was a voice. His voice. And it told me to check the basement. I remember whispering, "Tom?" My voice shook. I felt foolish talking to a piece of metal and wire, but my heart knew that sound. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and turned the knob. Static. Only static. The station was gone. I told myself maybe it was a trick of memory. Maybe my mind had finally cracked under the loneliness. But the way he said it, gentle, serious, like he used to when something was wrong, it didn't feel like imagination. It felt like a warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. The radio sat unplugged on the counter, but I kept glancing at it, half expecting it to come alive again. The house was too quiet. Even the wind outside had stopped. I laid there staring at the ceiling, feeling that old ache of missing him rise up again, the ache that never really goes away, just hides behind daily routines. Thomas and I were married for 43 years. We raised 2 children, Emily and Ryan. Both live out of state now, busy with their own lives, their own kids. They call sometimes, though mostly it's texts. "Hi Mom, how's your day?" "Good." I always type back. Quiet. They don't know what quiet really means. Tom used to fill every corner of this old house with life. He'd whistle in the kitchen, hum while fixing things, and talk through every movie we ever watched. He wasn't perfect, Lord knows he wasn't, but he was mine. He died suddenly, a heart attack, the doctor said. One moment, he was out in the garage tinkering with his old tools. The next, he was gone. I found him. That image, it never leaves you. His hand was still holding the wrench, his face calm, as if he didn't even feel it coming. I remember kneeling beside him, screaming his name, my tears falling onto the concrete. There's a stain there, one I could never scrub clean no matter how many times I tried. After the funeral, everyone told me time would heal me. But time doesn't heal, it just teaches you how to hide your pain better. So when I heard his voice on the radio, it was like time folded back on itself. Like the universe was mocking me. Still, something deep inside whispered, what if it wasn't? What if that was really him? By morning, I couldn't shake it. My heart kept pounding every time I looked toward the basement door. I hadn't gone down there in years, not since the day after he died. He used to spend hours down there, fixing old radios and clocks, tinkering with gadgets he'd collect from garage sales. It was his space. After the funeral, I shut the door and never opened it again. I told myself it was too painful, but if I'm being honest, I was scared. Not of ghosts, but of memories. That morning, as sunlight crept through the blinds, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that closed door. The air felt thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. I whispered, "What are you trying to tell me, Tom?" The radio stayed silent. I made breakfast, scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast, out of habit, then remembered I only needed 1 plate. I put the second one back and sighed. My neighbor, Carol, stopped by later to drop off a casserole. She's been checking in ever since Tom passed, sweet woman. She said, "You look pale, honey. Everything all right?" I almost told her. Almost said, my dead husband just spoke through the radio. But how do you say that without sounding insane? So I just smiled and said, "Didn't sleep much." She patted my hand. "You should get out more, Evelyn. You spend too much time in this house. It's not good for you." Maybe she's right. But what she doesn't understand is, this house is all I have left of him. That evening, I sat by the radio again. I didn't turn it on, just looked at it. The wooden edges were worn smooth where his fingers used to rest. The smell of old dust and varnish filled the air. I whispered, "If it's really you, Tom, say something." Silence. I waited for 10 minutes. Then 20. Nothing but the tick of the clock on the wall. Finally, I laughed at myself, though it came out more like a sob. "You're losing it, Evelyn," I said under my breath. But as I stood up to leave, the radio crackled again. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Then came static, and behind it, a faint whisper. "Evelyn." I stumbled back, hand on my chest. My knees nearly gave out. "Tom," I whispered. "Is that really you?" No answer. Just the faint hum of a low frequency. And then 3 words again, clear, calm, certain. "Check the basement." I didn't move for a full minute. My whole body was trembling. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, my ears ringing like the world had gone silent except for those 3 words echoing in my mind. The basement. Why there? Was it just my mind replaying old memories, or was someone trying to reach me? My eyes drifted toward the door again. It stood at the end of the hallway, paint chipped, light dim. The kind of door you'd walk past without a second thought, until you had a reason to be afraid of it. And now I did. I didn't open it that night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the living room, the light of the lamp flickering softly, my heart aching with confusion. What could possibly be in that basement after all these years? Tools. Dust. Maybe an old box of his things I'd forgotten. But deep down, I knew there was something more. Something that had been waiting for me. The next morning, I woke early. I told myself I'd go down there, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I made a pot of coffee, grabbed a flashlight, and stood in front of the basement door. My hand hovered over the knob. The wood felt cold. Colder than it should have been. And for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard something faint coming from below. Not movement exactly, but a kind of hum, low and steady, like electricity or a heartbeat. I stepped back, my breath shaky. "Tom," I whispered, "if you're trying to tell me something, I'm listening." The radio, sitting on the counter behind me, crackled once. Then silence. I looked back at the door. My fingers brushed the handle. Something about the air felt heavier, charged. The smell of metal and dust filled my nose. My heart pounded as I turned the knob just a little. The hinges creaked softly, like a groan from somewhere deep in the house's bones. And then I stopped. Because in the faint beam of morning light coming through the hallway window, I saw it, a faint muddy footprint at the top of the stairs. Not mine. Fresh. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood on end. Someone had been down there. My knees went weak. I backed away slowly, eyes locked on that print. It led downward into the darkness, the basement I hadn't touched in years. My heart hammered in my chest. I could barely breathe. Had someone broken in? Was this what Tom was warning me about? I grabbed the phone, hands shaking, ready to call the police, but then I stopped. Because the footprint, it was the size of his. And I remembered. The day he died, he was wearing those same worn-out work boots. The ones with the faded sole pattern. The same pattern now sitting in front of me. I sank to the floor, tears spilling down my cheeks. I didn't know what to believe anymore. All I knew was one thing, something in that basement was calling to me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I was more afraid or hopeful. If you've ever felt a moment when the past reached out and touched the present, when your heart swore it heard someone you've lost, please hit the like button. I just need to know I'm not the only one. I didn't sleep that night. The clock on the wall glowed 2:37 a.m., but my mind refused to rest. The words from the radio kept echoing inside me, that low, broken voice that sounded just like Tom. Check the basement. Every time I shut my eyes, I could see his face, the one I kissed goodbye before he went to the hospital that last time. The next morning, sunlight came through the curtains, pale and uncertain. My daughter, Emily, stopped by with coffee, as she often did on Thursdays. "Mom, you look awful," she said softly, setting the cup on the table. I didn't sleep, I replied, my voice shaky. Something strange happened last night. Her eyebrows knitted together. Strange how? I hesitated. I didn't want her to think I was losing my mind. The radio came on by itself, I whispered. And I heard your father's voice. Emily froze. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then she forced a small laugh. Mom, it's probably just interference. You know how these old radios are. I smiled weakly, pretending to agree. But deep down, something told me it wasn't just static. After she left, I sat in Tom's old chair, the one with the worn-out armrest where he used to rest his hand while reading the newspaper. The smell of his aftershave still lingered faintly on the cushion. I closed my eyes, remembering the last conversation we ever had. Promise me you'll be brave, and, he'd said, his voice weak but clear. There's something you'll understand later. At the time, I thought he was talking about grief, about living without him. But now, those words felt heavier, almost coded. That evening, the wind howled outside, bending the trees until they groaned. I turned on the same radio again, my fingers trembling. The dial light flickered. For a few seconds, all I heard was static, and then a faint whisper. And I dropped the mug I was holding. It shattered on the floor. Tom, I breathed. The whisper came again, this time a little clearer. Check the basement. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Then, silence. The static died. I wanted to run, to call Emily, to tell someone, but a strange calm washed over me. I couldn't explain it. I felt like Tom was near, guiding me. The next morning, I finally gathered the courage to go down there. The basement door creaked open like it hadn't been touched in years. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of damp concrete filled my lungs. Tom's old tools still hung on the wall. The hammer, the screwdriver set, even that broken flashlight he swore he'd fix someday. I turned on the light. It flickered weakly, illuminating old boxes stacked against the far wall. One of the boxes had Tom's handwriting on it, Bill's 1995. I smiled sadly. He'd always been meticulous about keeping records. But as I reached for it, something odd caught my eye, a small section of the wall that didn't quite match the rest. The paint there was newer, cleaner. My stomach twisted. I ran my hand over it. The sound was hollow. For a second, I thought of stopping, of pretending I hadn't noticed. But curiosity, or maybe love, pushed me forward. I found the hammer and struck the wall once. The sound echoed through the basement. Another hit, and a piece of plaster fell away. Behind it was a small wooden panel, nailed shut. Inside, my hands shook uncontrollably as I pried it open. There, wrapped in an old cloth, was a metal box. I lifted it out slowly, the weight surprising me. I placed it on the workbench and opened it. Inside were stacks of old papers, a faded photograph of a young Tom with a woman I didn't recognize, and something that looked like a key. My breath hitched. Oh my God. The photograph, it wasn't me. It was someone else. She had dark hair, bright eyes, and Tom's arm was wrapped tightly around her. They looked happy. I sat down on the cold floor, staring at it. My chest felt heavy, like a storm was gathering inside. Who are you? I whispered, tracing her face with my thumb. That night, I couldn't eat. Couldn't think straight. Memories of our marriage played in my mind like a movie I suddenly didn't understand. The business trips, the late-night phone calls, the envelopes he never let me touch. I thought I knew him. After 42 years together, I thought I knew every line on his face, every thought behind his smile. But now I wasn't sure. I went back to the basement the next morning, searching through the box again. There were old receipts, letters, even a small velvet pouch. Inside it, a gold ring. Not his wedding band. A different one. Women's size. Something deep in my chest cracked open. I sat there on the floor, holding that ring, realizing how little I really knew about the man I'd built a life with. Then the radio upstairs turned on. By itself. I froze, heart hammering. Slowly, I climbed the basement stairs. The static grew louder as I got closer. The radio sat on the counter, its light flickering faintly. And the voice came again, softer this time, almost sorrowful. "I'm sorry." I stumbled back, pressing my hand against the wall. "Tom? What is this? Who is she?" Static again. Then the faintest whisper. "Look under the floor." My eyes widened. "Under the floor?" I repeated, my voice shaking. I turned toward the wooden boards beneath the radio stand. The same boards Tom had replaced a few months before he passed. And then I remembered. The day he'd done it, he told me to stay out of the kitchen. Said he'd spilled something dangerous and didn't want me near it. I hadn't thought twice about it then. But now I could feel my pulse pounding through my temples. I grabbed a screwdriver, dropped to my knees, and began prying up the first board. The sound of the nails squealing against the wood sent chills down my spine. As the board lifted, I could see a small metal box wedged in the gap below. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Inside was a stack of letters, all addressed to Tom Walker from someone named Margaret Ellis. The first was dated 1978, the year before we got married. I unfolded one with care. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting delicate. "My dearest Tom, I'm still waiting for your promise. You said once you'd tell her everything. Please, don't let me keep living like this. She deserves to know." My mouth went dry. The letters kept coming one after another, each one pleading, emotional, desperate. The last one was dated just a year before he died. And that's when it hit me. Margaret wasn't some fling from the past. She was still alive when he was. I sat back, my whole body trembling. My eyes burned with tears I didn't want to fall. The man I loved, the man who'd held my hand through everything, had been living a double life. Still, some part of me refused to believe it. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe there was more. But deep down, I knew. I reached for the radio, hands shaking, whispering, "Tom, if you can really hear me, tell me why." Silence. Then, a soft whisper through the static. "Check the basement again." My breath caught. The basement again? I had already torn half of it apart. What more could there be? My mind raced, my heart thundering as I glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. For a long time, I stood there in the dark kitchen, holding that photograph, the letters, the ring. All the proof of a life I never knew existed. Finally, I took a deep breath and whispered, "All right, Tom, I'll go." As I reached for the basement door again, the house creaked, long and low, like it was warning me. The air felt colder this time, the shadows deeper. And as I stepped onto that first stair, flashlight trembling in my hand, I had no idea that what I was about to find next would change everything. That night, something changed, though I didn't know it yet. The stairs groaned beneath me as I descended into the basement again, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air was colder tonight, unnaturally cold. My breath came out in soft white clouds as I whispered to myself, "It's just the house settling, that's all." But the sound of my own voice didn't comfort me anymore. It felt like the walls were listening. I reached the bottom step and paused. The smell of damp wood and rust filled my nose. The same spot where I'd found the metal box still sat open on the floor, the dust around it disturbed by my frantic searching earlier. But this time, I noticed something different. One of the floorboards, just beneath the old tool shelf, looked newer, lighter in color, as if it had been replaced more recently than the others. My fingers shook as I knelt down. "Tom," I whispered softly, "if you're here, please just tell me what you want me to see." Nothing. Only silence. I pressed the edge of the screwdriver under the board and pried it loose. The nail gave way with a scream of metal. Beneath it lay another box, smaller, older, covered in dirt and what looked like mold. I hesitated. For a moment, I didn't want to open it. I didn't want any more truths. I'd already lost the version of my husband I thought I knew. But then, the radio upstairs turned on again. My heart leapt into my throat. Static. Then his voice, faint, trembling, distant. "Please, and forgive me." Tears filled my eyes as I yelled up toward the sound. Forgive you for what, Tom? What did you do? The radio clicked off. I opened the box. Inside were 2 envelopes and a small, leather-bound notebook. The first envelope was addressed to N. Walker. My name. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single letter, written in Tom's familiar handwriting. The stairs groaned beneath me as I descended into the basement again, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air was colder tonight, unnaturally cold. My breath came out in soft white clouds as I whispered to myself, "It's just the house settling, that's all." But the sound of my own voice didn't comfort me anymore. It felt like the walls were listening. I reached the bottom step and paused. The smell of damp wood and rust filled my nose. The same spot where I'd found the metal box still sat open on the floor, the dust around it disturbed by my frantic searching earlier. But this time, I noticed something different. One of the floorboards, just beneath the old tool shelf, looked newer, lighter in color, as if it had been replaced more recently than the others. My fingers shook as I knelt down. "Tom," I whispered softly, "if you're here, please just tell me what you want me to see." Nothing. Only silence. I pressed the edge of the screwdriver under the board and pried it loose. The nail gave way with a scream of metal. Beneath it lay another box, smaller, older, covered in dirt and what looked like mold. I hesitated. For a moment, I didn't want to open it. I didn't want any more truths. I'd already lost the version of my husband I thought I knew. But then, the radio upstairs turned on again. My heart leapt into my throat. Static. Then his voice, faint, trembling, distant. "Please, and forgive me." Tears filled my eyes as I yelled up toward the sound. "Forgive you for what, Tom? What did you do?" The radio clicked off. I opened the box. Inside were 2 envelopes and a small, leather-bound notebook. The first envelope was addressed to N. Walker. My name. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single letter, written in Tom's familiar handwriting. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I couldn't breathe. My chest ached like someone had wrapped a fist around my ribs. "He lied to me," I whispered. "My whole life." The radio came alive again, louder this time, the static cutting through my sobs. "And," I screamed, slamming my fist against the floor. "Stop it. Stop haunting me." Silence. Then a single phrase through the static. "He didn't know." I froze. "Didn't know what?" I cried out. "Didn't know she was pregnant? Didn't know she existed?" But there was no reply. Only static, soft and hollow, like the house itself was sighing. Hours passed before I could move again. I sat there on the cold basement floor, staring at the open box, my tears falling onto the wood. My mind replayed everything. Every late night he'd come home tired. Every excuse. Every gentle smile he gave me when I asked about his work trips. Then I thought of Emily. A sweet, innocent Emily. She had no idea. Or did she? A memory surfaced. Something she'd said after his funeral. "Dad always looked worried, like there was something he wanted to tell you, but couldn't." At the time, I brushed it off as grief. But now, maybe she'd seen more than I realized. I clutched the letter, my knuckles white. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until I knew the whole truth. I looked at the notebook again, scanning the pages. One entry was marked with a star. "If anything happens to me, call Robert Keller. He knows everything." Robert Keller. The name meant nothing to me. But below it was an address, a P.O. box number in Chicago. My mind raced. Why would Tom hide something like this from me for 40 years? What kind of thing was he involved in? I stood up slowly, the floor creaking beneath me. The air felt thicker, heavier. I wanted to leave, to run, to pretend I'd never gone down there. But before I reached the stairs, something caught my attention. The radio had turned on again, by itself. This time, there was no static. Only silence. Then, slowly, a familiar song began to play, our song. The one Tom used to hum when he'd fix the car or dance with me in the kitchen. Unchained melody. My knees gave out. I sat on the bottom step, sobbing as the melody filled the basement. Then, over the music, came his voice again. Softer now. And I didn't mean to hurt you. I looked up at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face. Then why, Tom? Why didn't you just tell me? Static answered me again. But beneath it, just barely, I heard something else, another voice. A woman's voice. Faint, trembling, angry. He promised me, too. I froze. My blood ran cold. Who are you? The radio hissed, then cut off completely. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. My heart was pounding so fast I thought it might give out. The house was completely silent again, but I couldn't shake that voice, that woman's voice. I sat at the kitchen table, clutching the letter and staring at the photograph of Margaret and the baby. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Could Margaret still be alive? Could that have been her voice? Or was it something else entirely? The next morning, I called the number written inside the notebook next to Robert Keller's name. A man answered, his voice deep, cautious. Hello, Mr. Keller? I said softly. My name is Ann Walker. I think you knew my husband, Tom Walker. There was a long pause on the other end. Who told you to call me? I swallowed hard. He did. Silence. Then, slowly, the man said, Mrs. Walker, there are things about your husband's past you don't want to know. Tears filled my eyes. You don't understand. I already know too much. He sighed heavily. Then you need to listen carefully. Tom wasn't just a mechanic like he told you. He used to work for a company that laundered money, dangerous people, powerful ones. When he tried to get out, they used someone close to him as leverage. A woman named Margaret Ellis. My heart sank. So it's true. Yes. But it's worse than you think, Keller continued quietly. Margaret disappeared in 1980. We never found her. The world around me blurred. Disappeared? Your husband always blamed himself. He thought she died because of him. That's why he never talked about her. Why he spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. My throat tightened. And the baby? There was a long silence. He never mentioned a baby. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a crack. My heart was racing, my head spinning. If Margaret had vanished and Tom didn't know about the baby, then who was Emily? I stumbled to the living room and pulled out the old birth certificate from my drawer. My eyes scanned the paper desperately, looking for something, anything, that would tell me I was wrong. But there it was. Emily Walker, born January 15th, 1979. Mother, Ann Walker. Father, Thomas Walker. Except, I remembered that week too clearly now. I'd been bedridden after a miscarriage. Tom had been gone for 2 weeks on business. And when he returned, he'd come home carrying Emily in his arms. She's ours now, he'd said with tears in his eyes. Don't ask questions and just love her. And I had. For 45 years, I had loved her like my own. My knees buckled. I fell against the wall, sobbing uncontrollably. Everything, my marriage, my motherhood, my entire life, was built on lies. Then the radio turned on one last time. Tom's voice whispered, and, please protect her. And as I looked toward the basement door, that same cold wind crept through the cracks again. Something told me this wasn't over. Stay with me till the end. What I found next still keeps me awake at night. The night after I learned the truth, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of the house sounded like Tom's footsteps, every gust of wind like a whisper trying to finish a sentence he'd never spoken. I sat in the living room until dawn, clutching that faded photograph of Margaret and the baby who might have been my Emily. When the morning light broke through the curtains, it cast a dull, golden haze across the floor. The same house that had once been my refuge now felt like a stranger's home, haunted not by ghosts, but by secrets buried under decades of silence. I needed answers, and this time, I wasn't afraid to find them. I called Robert Keller again. He didn't answer. So I found his address online and drove to the small office in Chicago written in Tom's notebook. The drive was long, quiet, and heavy, every mile filled with memories of a man I no longer knew. When I arrived, the building looked abandoned, chipped paint, broken blinds, and a faded sign that read Keller and Associates, Private Investigations. My heart pounded as I climbed the steps and knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Mr. Keller? It's Ann Walker. Please. I just need to talk. The door creaked open slightly. A tall, gray-haired man stood behind it, his eyes wary. You shouldn't have come here, he said in a low voice. Please, I whispered, holding up the photo. You owe me the truth. He looked at it, and his face changed. You found the box, didn't you? I nodded. He sighed and motioned for me to come in. The office smelled of stale coffee and dust. Old case files lined the walls, and a single desk lamp flickered weakly. Your husband, Keller began, sitting across from me, wasn't a bad man, Mrs. Walker. But he was trapped. He got involved with people laundering money through fake charity groups in the late 70s. Margaret Ellis worked with him. She was supposed to be his handler, but they got close. My throat tightened. Close how? He hesitated. They fell in love. The words hit me like a slap. My chest burned, but I stayed silent. I had to hear it all. She got pregnant. He wanted to leave everything, her, the operation, the crime. He wanted to go clean. But the group didn't let go that easily. Margaret threatened to expose them, and within weeks, she disappeared. Disappeared? I echoed numbly. Or was made to disappear? Keller's eyes softened. We don't know for sure. But a few months later, your husband showed up with a baby girl. He said she was Margaret's daughter, and that her mother had abandoned her. He begged me to help falsify the papers so he could raise her as his own. I couldn't speak. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He was terrified they'd come after the child, Keller continued. So he made her legally yours. You became her mother on paper. He thought he was protecting both of you. Tears slid down my cheeks. I whispered, he lied to me for 40 years, but he thought he was saving us. Keller nodded slowly. That's what men like Tom do. They carry the guilt until it kills them. I stared at the photo again. Margaret smiling faintly, the baby in her arms. And the woman's voice on the radio? I asked. Keller frowned. What voice? I explained everything. The static, the voice that sounded like Tom's, and the faint, trembling woman's voice that whispered. He promised me, too. He rubbed his jaw. Maybe you're hearing echoes, Mrs. Walker. Trauma plays tricks on the mind. But I wasn't convinced. No, I said firmly. It was real. It felt real. He sighed. Whatever you believe, there's one more thing you should see. He pulled out an old file and laid it on the desk. Inside was a document marked Case 427B, Ellis disappearance. Attached was a report dated 1980. My hands trembled as I scanned the lines. Subject: Margaret Ellis. Last seen near the Walker residence, March 12, 1980. Found vehicle abandoned near Highway 47. Blood traces inside. No body recovered. My eyes widened. Near house. Yes. Your husband told the police she left town. But I always suspected she came to see him one last time. A lump formed in my throat. You think he killed her? Keller looked down. I think he loved her. But love and guilt, they make people do strange things. The room spun slightly. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. I need to see where they found her car, I said quietly. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Mrs. Walker, that was 45 years ago. I don't care, I said. Take me there. The highway stretched out like a scar through the woods. Keller drove in silence while I stared out the window, the wind rustling through dying autumn trees. We stopped near an overgrown ditch where rusted metal jutted out from the soil, what was left of an old blue sedan. I stepped out, the chill biting through my sweater. The earth smelled damp, old, forgotten. This is it, Keller said softly. Right here. I walked toward the wreckage, my hands trembling. My knees ached as I knelt beside the frame. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal half buried in the dirt. I brushed it off and gasped. It was a necklace, a small silver locket, still intact. I opened it, and inside was a faded photo. Margaret, holding a baby. Again. But this time, the other side of the locket had Tom's picture. I felt my breath leave me. She wore this the night she disappeared. Keller's eyes darkened. Looks like it. I stood there, staring at that tiny photograph, tears streaming down my face. He did love her, I whispered. And he loved me too. But in different ways. And maybe that's what destroyed him. Keller placed a hand on my shoulder. What do you want to do now? I looked at the trees, the road, the endless distance ahead. I want to tell Emily the truth. All of it. That evening, when I returned home, the house felt heavier than ever. The radio sat silent in the corner. I turned it on, static. Then silence. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wanted to hear him again. But nothing came. Instead, I sat down and began writing a letter to Emily. My darling girl, there are things I should have told you long ago, things about your father, about who you really are. You are loved, more than you can ever imagine. But the truth matters now, even if it hurts. I sealed the letter and placed it on her dresser. That night, I finally slept until the sound of footsteps woke me. Slow, deliberate, creaking down the hallway. My heart pounded. I reached for the lamp. It flickered. Then the radio turned on by itself again. Static. Then a soft hum. A woman's voice. Faint. Broken. Thank you for finding me. I froze. Margaret. Silence. Then Tom's voice followed, layered with hers. Soft, sorrowful. It's over now, Anne. You set us free. Tears streamed down my face as the static faded. The air in the room felt lighter, as if the weight of 4 decades had finally lifted. I whispered into the darkness, "You both deserved peace." The next morning, I went to Emily's house. She opened the door, confusion flickering across her face when she saw me holding the photograph and the locket. "Mom? What's wrong?" I took her hands gently. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you something. About your father, about where you came from." Her brow furrowed. "Mom, you're scaring me?" I smiled sadly. "No, baby. I'm freeing us." And as I began to tell her everything, the box, the letters, the voices, the truth, I saw the same thing in her eyes that I'd seen in mine the day before. The fragile moment when love meets betrayal and yet somehow chooses compassion. By the time I finished, she was crying silently. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "You're still my mom. Nothing changes that." I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her heartbeat against mine. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Later that night, as I sat in the kitchen sipping tea, I looked toward the radio again. The static was gone. Just quiet. Peaceful. Perfect quiet. I smiled faintly. "Don't blink now," I whispered. "What happens next changes everything." I still remember that morning clearly. The sunlight came through the curtains in soft, golden bands, touching the same old armchair where Henry used to read his newspaper. The air smelled faintly of coffee. I still make it every morning, even though no one drinks it but me now. Habit, I suppose. Or maybe hope. Hope that somehow I'm not completely alone. After the truth came out, after I learned what Henry had hidden beneath this house all those years, I spent days just sitting at the kitchen table, unable to move. The basement door was still open then, the smell of dust and old paper filling the house. For a while, I couldn't bring myself to go down there again. The secrets, the voice on the radio, the pain of realizing I didn't really know the man I'd shared my life with, it was too much. I'd lost him twice, once to death, and once to truth. But grief does something strange to you. It bends you, but it also forces you to see clearly. One morning, I made myself a cup of tea and said out loud, "Enough, Martha. You're not afraid of the truth anymore." And I meant it. I went down to that basement again. Slowly, step by step. The wood creaked under my feet. The same dusty radio sat on the workbench, silent now. I could still hear his voice in my memory. That night it spoke to me, saying those words, "Check the basement." My hands trembled as I turned the dial again. even though I knew it wouldn't work. Nothing but static answered me. But somehow, that static felt softer now, less like a warning and more like a goodbye. I found the envelope he had left behind, the one that told me everything. His confession. His reason. The hidden money, the secret investments, the insurance meant for someone else, his guilt written in ink. But I also found another letter that I had missed the first time. It was tucked under a stack of old blueprints, sealed and yellowed with time. The handwriting was his. My breath caught. It began simply. My dearest Martha, if you're reading this, it means the truth found you before I could explain myself. Please, before you judge me, know this. Every lie I told, every risk I took, was because I loved you. I remember sinking to my knees, letters shaking in my hands. He wrote about the debts, the investments that went wrong, the fear of losing everything, the house, our dignity. He'd hidden the money not for greed, but for protection. He wanted to make sure I would never be left alone, never have to struggle. He'd even worked secretly with a friend from the bank to keep it hidden from creditors, from family, even from me. But guilt eats a man alive. And maybe that's what really killed him. Not age, not illness, but the weight of his own secrets. By the time I finished reading, tears had blurred every word. I pressed that letter to my heart and whispered, "Oh, Henry, you fool. You good, stubborn fool." I didn't know whether to hate him or forgive him. So I did both. Some days I cursed his silence, and other days I thanked the heavens he tried so hard to protect me. Maybe love isn't about perfection. Maybe it's about surviving the flaws we never meant to make. Over the next few months, I cleaned that basement. Slowly, carefully. I sold a house, used some of the money to start a small community library in his name. It's funny, the man who hid everything left behind something that brings people together now. I can almost hear him chuckling at the irony. Sometimes, when I'm shelving books, I still feel him. A faint warmth near my shoulder, a gentle whisper in the air. Once, the old radio from the library's lost and found crackled softly while I was alone closing up. For a moment, I froze, my heart pounding like it had that night. And then, through the static, I thought I heard it again. "You did good, Martha." Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, or maybe love really does echo in the places we least expect. I've learned that grief never leaves you. It just changes shape. It turns into quiet strength, into small smiles at old memories. I've learned that secrets can destroy you, but sometimes they also protect what matters most. The basement is empty now. The shelves are bare. The dust is gone. But every time I pass by that door, I still whisper, "Thank you for telling me to check, Henry. Thank you for letting me know the truth." And sometimes, when the light hits just right and the radio hums softly in the corner, I swear I can almost hear his laughter again. Soft, distant, and free. If I've learned anything through all of this, it's that love doesn't end when the heart stops beating. It lingers, in letters, in memories, in voices carried by static. Love just finds new ways to speak to us. Sometimes I still set 2 cups on the table before breakfast, then I remember I only need 1. But I keep the second cup anyway, because maybe somewhere he's still listening. If you've ever lost someone and still feel them close, tell me what city you're listening from. I'd love to know your story, too. And if this touched your heart, subscribe and stay with me for more true feeling life journeys. Because sometimes the past